Imagine a scene frozen in time. Abraham, fresh from a hard-fought victory over mighty kings, encounters a figure shrouded in mystery. In the heart of history, a man appears, neither bound by lineage nor time, yet carrying an undeniable divine presence. This is Melchizedek, the king of Salem and priest of the Most High God. Unlike the rulers of his time, he wields no sword, commands no army, and claims no earthly empire. Instead, he brings something far greater: bread, wine, and a blessing. Who was this enigmatic king of righteousness, and what was the deeper meaning behind this meeting? The book of Genesis, chapter 14, provides a glimpse into this momentous event. Abraham, having just rescued his nephew Lot from the chaos of war, returns victorious, yet weary. Amidst this tension, Melchizedek steps forward, not as a warrior, but as a figure of peace and divine authority. His offering of bread and wine, more than mere sustenance, carries a profound spiritual weight. Centuries later, these very elements would be woven into one of the most sacred moments in history, the Last Supper of Christ. This encounter stands out not just as an event in Abraham's journey, but as a moment of prophetic significance. It bridges the Old and New Testaments, hinting at a priesthood beyond lineage and a kingship beyond earthly power. Could it be that Melchizedek was more than a historical figure? Some see him as a foreshadowing of Christ, a divine presence breaking through time. Whatever the case, his brief yet impactful appearance leaves us with a question. Was this meeting merely a coincidence, or was it orchestrated by a higher plan? The name Melchizedek in Hebrew carries deep meaning, king of justice, while Salem is linked to shalom, meaning peace. This presents him as a dual figure, the king of justice and the king of peace. Many scholars believe that Salem later became Jerusalem, reinforcing Melchizedek's role as a sacred bridge between the divine and humanity. However, one of the most striking aspects of his story is the complete absence of lineage, an unusual detail in biblical tradition, where genealogy often defines a person's spiritual authority. Who was Melchizedek? Was he a mere human king, or something far greater? His lack of recorded ancestors and descendants has led some to see him as a foreshadowing of Christ, an eternal figure outside the bounds of time and lineage. This theory gains even more weight when we consider that he was a priest of the Most High God before the Levitical priesthood even existed. His presence in Genesis challenges the traditional religious structures of the time, showing that spiritual authority does not always come from earthly inheritance, but from a divine calling. One of the most powerful moments in this encounter is Abraham's act of giving Melchizedek a tithe, 1/10 of all his possessions. This was more than just an offering. It was a profound act of spiritual recognition. Abraham, a great patriarch and leader, bowed before Melchizedek's authority, acknowledging a higher spiritual order. This act set a precedent. True divine authority is not based on earthly power, but on a mission entrusted by God. Even more fascinating is Melchizedek's offering, bread and wine. Unlike the traditional animal sacrifices performed by priests of the time, his offering was purely symbolic, pointing toward a sacrifice of peace and communion, rather than blood and atonement. This foreshadowed a new spiritual order, where the connection with God would not rely on external rituals, but on an inner transformation. Centuries later, these same elements, bread and wine, would take on even greater significance at the Last Supper of Christ. The mystery of Melchizedek deepens when we consider his sudden appearance and disappearance in the biblical narrative. He arrives without introduction, blesses Abraham, and then vanishes from history. This has led some to question, was he merely a historical figure, or was his presence meant to represent something eternal? The book of Hebrews later revisits this enigma, presenting Melchizedek as an archetype of the eternal priesthood, directly linking him to Jesus Christ. Unlike the Levitical priests, who had to prove their lineage, Melchizedek simply existed, a powerful break from tradition, opening the way for a priesthood based not on human descent, but on divine appointment. Another intriguing aspect is the significance of Salem, the kingdom over which Melchizedek ruled. Long before it became Jerusalem, it was symbolically seen as a place of divine peace. His reign was not built on conquest or war, but on justice and harmony. His very name and title suggest that he embodied a divine principle, transcending the material world. This adds weight to the idea that Abraham's submission to Melchizedek symbolized something greater, a recognition that even the fathers of faith must bow before a higher spiritual authority. This concept leads us to a crucial realization. Jesus did not simply inherit Melchizedek's legacy, he fulfilled it completely. The Bible gives no further details about what happened to Melchizedek after his encounter with Abraham. He appears like a vision and disappears just as mysteriously. This reinforces the idea that he was more than just a historical figure. He was a representation of something eternal. His significance remained in the shadows until Psalm 110, which prophesied a king-priest who would establish an everlasting kingdom of justice. This direct link between Melchizedek and Jesus creates a powerful narrative arc spanning millennia. More than just a historical curiosity, this connection holds deep spiritual meaning. Melchizedek challenges religious norms, forcing us to reflect on what truly defines a priest in the eyes of God. Could it be that he represents an eternal priesthood that still resonates today? An invitation for us to embark on a divine journey? In this light, Melchizedek ceases to be merely an ancient enigma. He becomes a key to understanding Christ's mission. He was not just an ordinary king or priest. He was a milestone in the unfolding of God's eternal plan, a glimpse into a spiritual order that would find its ultimate fulfillment in Jesus Christ. Now, let us turn our attention to the next chapter, Psalm 110, and the profound revelations it offers regarding this mysterious spiritual lineage. When we arrive at Psalm 110, we encounter one of the most powerful and enigmatic passages in the entire Bible. This psalm, attributed to King David, is not merely a poetic composition, but a prophetic vision that unveils the concept of an eternal priesthood unlike anything the world had known. David begins with a striking declaration. "The Lord said to my Lord, 'Sit at my right hand until I make your enemies your footstool.'" These words are extraordinary, as David, himself a king, acknowledges a figure greater than himself, someone he calls "my Lord." But what makes this passage even more significant is the divine pronouncement that follows: "You are a priest forever, after the order of Melchizedek." This phrase would echo throughout history, shaping the theological understanding of the Messiah's role. To fully grasp the weight of these words, we must consider the historical and religious context of David's time. In ancient Israel, the priesthood was strictly regulated, confined to the descendants of Aaron from the tribe of Levi. No one outside this lineage could serve as a priest in the temple. Yet here, David speaks of a priesthood that does not stem from Levitical descent, but is established by divine decree. This was a radical departure from tradition, a vision of a priesthood that transcends human bloodlines and operates on the authority of God himself. But why would David, a king and warrior, speak of a priest in such exalted terms. As a ruler, he was deeply familiar with the strict boundaries between the roles of king and priest in Jewish society. Kings ruled over the people, while priests mediated between God and his people. The two offices were separate until now. In invoking the name of Melchizedek, David shatters these conventional boundaries. He points toward a future where the roles of king and priest would merge into one, embodied by a figure who would not only govern with power, but also lead with divine wisdom and spiritual authority. This idea was revolutionary. The only previous figure who had ever combined these two roles was Melchizedek himself, described in Genesis as both king of Salem and priest of the Most High God. By referencing him, David was not only drawing from history, but was revealing a divine blueprint, one that would ultimately be fulfilled in the person of Jesus Christ. Psalm 110 also presents an image of divine authority. "Sit at my right hand." This phrase signifies more than just honor. It implies a shared rulership, a position of co-governance over creation itself. In the New Testament, this vision is realized in Jesus, who, after his resurrection, is described as seated at the right hand of God. This imagery reinforces the idea that Jesus is not just an earthly leader, but one with eternal dominion, a ruler whose reign is established not by human power, but by divine will. One of the most compelling confirmations of this psalm's messianic significance comes from Jesus himself. In the Gospel of Matthew, 22:41-46, he challenges the Pharisees with a question: "If the Messiah is the son of David, why does David call him Lord?" This question left his opponents speechless. By referencing Psalm 110, Jesus was subtly revealing his divine nature. He was not merely a descendant of David, but the fulfillment of a far greater prophecy. He was the eternal priest-king that David had foreseen, the one who would establish a kingdom founded not on earthly conquest, but on justice, righteousness, and direct communion with God. Moreover, Psalm 110 emphasizes that this priesthood is not based on rituals, laws, or external lineage. Unlike the Levitical priesthood, which relied on tradition and strict adherence to temple regulations, the priesthood of Melchizedek, and by extension, Christ, was rooted in something deeper, a direct and unbreakable connection with God. This was not a ceremonial office, but a divine calling, one that could not be inherited by mere human descent, but was granted by divine anointing. For early Christians, this psalm provided undeniable proof that Jesus was not just another religious figure. He was the fulfillment of an ancient promise, the embodiment of an eternal priesthood that had been foretold for generations. The apostles frequently referenced Psalm 110 in their teachings, using it to demonstrate that Christ was not a temporary political leader, but the inaugurator of a new spiritual era. Ultimately, Psalm 110 is more than a poetic prophecy. It is a glimpse into God's grand design. It reveals that the Messiah would be both a sovereign ruler and an eternal priest, a bridge between heaven and earth, a king who leads not by force, but through divine righteousness. This vision, which David saw centuries before Christ's arrival, would find its ultimate fulfillment in Jesus, whose reign and priesthood continue to transform the world to this day. One of the most intriguing aspects of Psalm 110 is how David seems to recognize that this eternal priesthood is superior to the Levitical priesthood. This realization is significant when we remember that David himself, despite being Israel's greatest king, was never allowed to perform priestly duties. Even so, He speaks of a mysterious figure whose priesthood is not bound by human limitations, and he proclaims that this priest-king's rule will be eternal, something that only a divine lineage could sustain. But why does God choose Melchizedek, a seemingly obscure priest-king, as the ultimate model instead of the Levitical priests? The answer lies in the very essence of Melchizedek's nature. He was not just a ruler or a ritualistic figure. He embodied the perfect union of justice and peace. His priesthood was not defined by laws or hereditary lineage, but by divine appointment. Unlike the priests of Aaron's line, who were bound by temple rituals and repeated sacrifices, Melchizedek represents something much greater, an unbroken eternal connection between God and humanity. Psalm 110, then, is not just a prophetic poem written in antiquity. It is an invitation to reflect on the role of the eternal priesthood in our own lives. If Jesus is truly the high priest, according to the order of Melchizedek, what does that mean for us today? It signifies a profound shift in how we approach God. No longer do we rely on human intermediaries or complex religious rituals to access the divine. Instead, we are offered direct communion with God through Christ. Psalm 110 serves as a bridge between the Old Testament's promise of a coming Messiah and its fulfillment in Jesus. It reminds us that Melchizedek's priesthood is not just a historical curiosity, but a foundational truth that reshapes our understanding of redemption, justice, and our own spiritual journey. With this insight, we transition to a deeper exploration, the Book of Hebrews, which offers one of the most profound theological explanations of Christ's eternal priesthood. The Book of Hebrews stands out as one of the most remarkable texts in the New Testament. Written with extraordinary theological depth, it seeks to demonstrate that Jesus is not only the long-awaited Messiah, but also the supreme high priest of a new covenant. What makes Hebrews particularly fascinating is its bold decision to turn to the figure of Melchizedek to explain the nature of Christ's priesthood. Here, we witness a complete redefinition of what it means to be a priest before God. From the very beginning, Hebrews makes a crucial point. The Levitical priesthood, while significant under the Old Covenant, was inherently limited. The priests who descended from Aaron had to continually offer sacrifices, both for their own sins and for the sins of the people. Furthermore, their service was always temporary, as they were mortal and subject to death. This system, rooted in external rituals and hereditary succession, pointed to a greater need, an eternal, perfect, and incorruptible priesthood. The author of Hebrews then directly quotes Psalm 110, "You are a priest forever, according to the order of Melchizedek." Hebrews 5:6. This statement establishes a crucial theological truth. Jesus is not a priest according to the order of Aaron, but according to a different and far superior lineage, one that predates the laws of Moses. Melchizedek, the enigmatic priest-king of Salem, becomes the archetype of Christ's priesthood. One of the most profound teachings in Hebrews is that Jesus does not merely offer sacrifices. He is the sacrifice. Unlike the Levitical priests who repeatedly sacrificed animals to atone for sins, Jesus offered his own body and blood as the ultimate, once-and-for-all sacrifice. This act of self-giving did not need to be repeated, for it was perfect and complete. Through his death and resurrection, he inaugurated a new covenant, one in which forgiveness is no longer dependent on external rituals but on genuine faith in him. Another striking revelation in Hebrews is the argument that Jesus does not belong to the tribe of Levi, but to the tribe of Judah. According to Mosaic law, This should have automatically disqualified him from serving as a priest. However, Hebrews presents a powerful counter-argument. Jesus' priesthood is legitimate not because of human descent, but because it was established by God himself. This reinforces the idea that Melchizedek's priesthood, and by extension, Christ's priesthood, is not subject to human regulations but is rooted in divine will. In the end, the book of Hebrews does more than clarify theological doctrines. It reshapes how we understand our relationship with God. It reveals that Jesus' priesthood is not confined to a temple, a ritual, or a specific group of people. Instead, it is an eternal, all-encompassing reality, one that offers every believer direct access to God's presence. This truth is as relevant today as it was in the early church, inviting us to embrace a deeper, more personal connection with the divine. In Hebrews 7:3, the author presents a striking description of Melchizedek, stating that he is without father, without mother, without genealogy, having neither beginning of days nor end of life, but resembling the Son of God, he remains a priest forever. This portrayal reinforces the idea of an eternal and timeless priesthood, drawing a direct connection between Melchizedek and Christ. Scholars have long debated whether Melchizedek was a historical figure or a divine manifestation, but what matters most is the profound symbolism he represents, an unbroken, unchanging priesthood that is not interrupted by death. Hebrews also offers a powerful revelation about the heavenly tabernacle. Under the Old Covenant, Levitical priests served in an earthly temple, a mere shadow of the true heavenly sanctuary. However, Jesus, as the ultimate high priest, did not enter a physical structure made by human hands. Instead, he entered the very presence of God, offering not the blood of animals, but his own blood as a perfect and eternal sacrifice, securing redemption for all humanity. This moment marks a significant shift. Christ does not merely fulfill the ancient sacrificial system. He transcends it, inaugurating a new spiritual reality that surpasses everything that came before. Another crucial distinction made in Hebrews is the issue of purity. The priests of the Old Covenant had to undergo extensive purification rituals before ministering, as they themselves were flawed and sinful. In contrast, Jesus was entirely without sin. He needed no purification, for he was already the spotless and perfect high priest. The author of Hebrews emphasizes this point in Hebrews 4:15. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who in every respect has been tempted as we are, yet without sin. This profound truth establishes Jesus as the perfect mediator between God and humanity, one who fully understands our struggles, yet remains untainted by sin. Furthermore, Hebrews presents Jesus as the high priest of our confession. Hebrews 3:1, the one who continually intercedes on our behalf. His priesthood did not end with his resurrection and ascension. Rather, he remains forever as our intercessor before God. This truth is deeply comforting, as it assures us that we are never alone in our spiritual journey. Christ is always there, advocating for us, guiding us, and offering his grace. One of the most radical ideas in Hebrews is that by comparing Jesus to Melchizedek, the author shows that God's plan has always been far greater than the temporary laws given to Moses. The eternal priesthood points to the restoration of direct communion between humanity and God, eliminating the need for fallible human intermediaries. Jesus did not come merely to reform the old system. He came to establish something entirely new, something definitive and unshakable. For the early Christians, many of whom came from Jewish backgrounds, this message was both liberating and challenging. The idea of a priesthood based on grace rather than hereditary lineage was revolutionary. No longer did access to God depend on temple sacrifices or ritual purity. Instead, Hebrews boldly proclaims in Hebrews 4:16, "Let us then with confidence draw near to the throne of grace, that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in time of need." This statement invites believers into a direct and intimate relationship with God, free from the burdens of the old covenant. Ultimately, the vision of Jesus as the eternal high priest calls us to reflect on the true purpose of spirituality. It is not about performing mechanical rituals or following rigid traditions, but about stepping into a living, transformative relationship with the Creator. The book of Hebrews reminds us that Christ has opened a new and perfect way for this communion, one that no human limitation can obstruct. With this understanding, we arrive at one of the most profound revelations: the idea of a spiritual lineage that does not rely on biological descent, but on an eternal calling. The priesthood of Melchizedek, and by extension that of Christ, is not based on human inheritance, but on divine selection. When Hebrews presents Jesus as a priest, according to the order of Melchizedek, it is not merely a theological detail. It is a direct challenge to the religious structures of the time, and a radical redefinition of spirituality itself. This eternal priesthood signifies something far greater than a ritualistic role. It introduces a new kind of spiritual inheritance, one that is open to all who seek God in faith. Unlike the Levitical priesthood, which depended on genealogical succession, the priesthood of Melchizedek is established through a personal relationship with God and a commitment to justice, righteousness, and peace. This means that every believer is called to be, in a sense, a priest of the heart, a person who carries the presence of God and lives in alignment with His divine purpose. Thus, the book of Hebrews does not simply clarify theological doctrines. It reshapes how we understand our faith, our redemption, and our role in God's kingdom. Jesus, as the high priest in the order of Melchizedek, is not just the fulfillment of messianic prophecy. He is the cornerstone of a new and everlasting covenant, an invitation to a life of grace, faith, and direct communion with God. Throughout history, many religious traditions have emphasized the need for institutions, rituals, and sacrifices as a means to access God. However, the priesthood of Melchizedek challenges this notion by presenting a radically different approach, one that does not rely on external ceremonies but on an inner transformation. Jesus, as the eternal high priest in the order of Melchizedek, embodies this revolutionary idea, making the path to God open to all, regardless of background, culture, or social standing. His priesthood is not based on heredity or tradition, but on divine purpose, inviting everyone into a direct and personal relationship with God. The symbolism of the eternal priesthood goes beyond religious hierarchy. It speaks to a way of life marked by justice, love, and compassion. Melchizedek, known as both the King of Righteousness and the King of Peace, represents these ideals, and those who follow this spiritual lineage are called to live by them. This calling is not reserved for religious leaders, but extends to anyone who seeks to embody divine principles in their daily lives. Jesus reinforced this idea in the Beatitudes, declaring, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God." Matthew 5:9. This profound statement echoes Melchizedek's mission and highlights that true spirituality involves being an agent of reconciliation and transformation in a world often consumed by conflict and division. The Apostle Paul expands on this theme by referring to Christ's followers as ambassadors of God, entrusted with the message of reconciliation. This means that the priesthood of Melchizedek is not about status or power, but about humble service. Jesus demonstrated this truth when he washed his disciples' feet, a striking act that redefined leadership and priesthood. He showed that true authority does not come from exerting control over others, but from serving them with humility and love. This example remains a powerful reminder that spiritual greatness lies not in dominance, but in selfless devotion to others. Another key aspect of Melchizedek's priesthood is the absence of a bloodline requirement. Unlike the Levitical priests, whose role was inherited, this priesthood is based on faith and obedience to God's call. This teaches us that our spiritual identity is not determined by ancestry or tradition, but by our willingness to embrace divine grace. Just as Melchizedek appeared in biblical history without a recorded genealogy, the invitation to partake in this priesthood is open to all who seek justice and righteousness. By accepting this call, we, too, become reflections of this lineage, living out the principles of faith, integrity, and divine purpose. What makes this concept even more fascinating is that it is not limited to the Judeo-Christian tradition. Across different cultures and throughout history, figures have emerged who embody the essence of the priest-king archetype, leaders who combined wisdom with just governance. In Eastern traditions, enlightened masters played similar roles, guiding their followers towards spiritual awakening. In indigenous cultures, shamans and spiritual elders led their people in harmony with the divine and the natural world. The search for inner priesthood, the idea that spiritual authority is rooted in wisdom and righteousness rather than in external institutions, is a universal theme in human history. This spiritual heritage also manifests in everyday life. Being part of this eternal priesthood does not mean retreating into isolation or abandoning worldly responsibilities. On the contrary, it means transforming every action, no matter how small, into a sacred gesture, a kind word, an act of compassion, a moment of forgiveness. Each of these becomes a reflection of God's kingdom on earth. Jesus taught that the presence of God is revealed in the simplest of moments, emphasizing that true spirituality is not about grand displays, but about a heart aligned with divine love. Perhaps one of the most humbling lessons of Melchizedek's priesthood is the rejection of spiritual pride. This lineage is not about superiority or exclusivity, but about embracing a shared divine calling. True greatness does not come from being above others, but from being a vessel of light and love in a world overshadowed by division and self-interest. The priesthood of Melchizedek is a reminder that our spiritual journey is not a competition, but a continuous invitation to grow in grace, wisdom, and service. Finally, the eternal nature of this priesthood reassures us that no matter where we are in life, or how far we may have strayed, we can always return to God. Unlike earthly institutions that rise and fall, the priesthood of Melchizedek is unshakable. It is an eternal invitation to redemption and communion. Just as Jesus remains a priest forever, we too are called to remain connected to this divine source of grace and mercy. This heritage is a testament to the fact that we are more than fleeting beings in this world. We are part of a larger, timeless story, a lineage that transcends generations and unites us with the divine purpose. With this foundation in mind, we can now explore the influence of Melchizedek beyond the biblical narrative. His mysterious presence has intrigued theologians, philosophers, and spiritual seekers across different traditions. Over the centuries, he has been more than just a historical figure. He has become an archetype of divine wisdom and a universal mediator between the human and the divine. In mystical Judaism, particularly in Kabbalah, Melchizedek is seen as a representation of God's perfect justice and as the ultimate example of a tzaddik, or righteous one. For Kabbalists, he symbolizes a high spiritual state, a master who exists in complete harmony with divine laws, guiding others toward enlightenment. His figure is also closely associated with the Shekinah, the divine presence that dwells among humanity. Here, Melchizedek is not merely a historical character, but a direct conduit to the divine, representing the unity between heaven and earth. The enduring fascination with Melchizedek speaks to a deep spiritual truth, one that transcends religious boundaries. He embodies the universal longing for a connection to the divine that is not confined by human limitations. Whether seen through the lens of biblical scripture, mystical traditions, or cross-cultural archetypes, the priesthood of Melchizedek remains a profound symbol of divine justice, peace, and the eternal invitation to a higher way of life. In esoteric Christianity, Melchizedek is often seen as more than just a historical figure. He is regarded as a celestial being, an incarnation of eternal wisdom. Various mystical Christian traditions link him to the Logos, the living Word of God, and suggest that his mission was to prepare the way for the coming of Christ. In Gnostic texts, he appears as a cosmic priest whose role is to rescue souls from the illusions of the material world and guide them back to divine truth. The Gospel of Melchizedek, an apocryphal text, presents him as a divine emissary sent directly from God's presence, reinforcing the idea that he is not bound by time or earthly lineage. Beyond Christianity, Melchizedek's influence is found in Islamic traditions. Though not mentioned directly in the Quran, ancient Islamic texts speak of a wise and righteous prophet resembling him. Some Sufi traditions refer to him as Malik al-Sadiq, the righteous king, describing him as an invisible guide who accompanies sincere seekers on their spiritual journey. They believe he still exists on a higher plane, helping those who pursue truth with a pure heart. In modern esoteric circles, Melchizedek is often associated with the idea of cosmic order and spiritual brotherhoods. Some movements, such as the Order of Melchizedek, suggest that he leads a group of enlightened beings who serve as guardians of divine wisdom on earth. These teachings propose that Melchizedek is not just a historical character, but an eternal presence, continuously working to elevate human consciousness. His enigmatic nature has led to comparisons with figures from other spiritual traditions. In Hinduism, he has been linked to Brahman, the eternal and unchanging essence that sustains the universe. Just as Brahman exists beyond time, Melchizedek's lack of recorded origin or death suggests a similar transcendence. In Buddhism, he is sometimes compared to bodhisattvas, enlightened beings who forego their own liberation to assist others in reaching enlightenment. This parallel strengthens the image of Melchizedek as a compassionate guide, leading people toward divine wisdom. Indigenous cultures also present strikingly similar figures, spiritual leaders who mediate between the divine and humanity. Among Andean civilizations, the figure of Pachacutec is revered as a great reformer and priest of the universe. with no clear beginning or end to his story. Like Melchizedek, he symbolizes eternal justice and harmony, acting as a bridge between heaven and earth. In Western occult traditions, Melchizedek is often associated with hidden wisdom that emerges during critical moments to restore divine order. Alchemists and Hermetic philosophers describe him as a symbol of balance and transcendence, embodying the unity of opposites, king and priest, temporal and eternal, body and spirit. For them, he serves as a reminder that spiritual transformation is not about power or knowledge alone, but about achieving true inner harmony with the divine. A striking aspect of Melchizedek's story is that no account exists of his death or succession. Unlike other biblical figures, whose lifespans and genealogies are documented, Melchizedek simply appears and disappears, leaving the impression that he was not an ordinary man but an immortal archetype, a symbol of the eternal divine presence. Many mystical traditions believe in the existence of enlightened beings who secretly guide humanity throughout the ages, and Melchizedek fits this role perfectly. His presence across so many cultures and traditions suggests that his story is not just an isolated biblical account, but a universal symbol of wisdom, justice, and spiritual authority. His figure reminds us that righteousness and divine communion are not limited to any one faith or culture, but are fundamental truths accessible to all. Melchizedek's legacy also challenges the idea that spiritual lineage must be inherited through blood or tradition. He represents a priesthood beyond human institutions, one based on direct connection with the divine. This concept resonates deeply with those who seek spirituality outside of organized religion, emphasizing that enlightenment is not about status or hierarchy, but about embodying justice, peace, and wisdom in everyday life. This brings us to an intriguing question. Was Jesus an heir to the priesthood of Melchizedek, or was he its ultimate fulfillment? The letter to the Hebrews describes Jesus as the eternal priest in the order of Melchizedek, but not as someone who merely inherited an ancient tradition. Instead, he is presented as the full realization of what Melchizedek represented. This raises a profound theological question. Did Jesus come to continue an ancient spiritual lineage, or did he establish something entirely new? To answer this, it is essential to understand the nature of Melchizedek's priesthood. Unlike the Levitical priests, who were chosen based on lineage, Melchizedek's role was given directly by God. He was both king and priest, two roles that were usually separate in Jewish tradition. Yet Melchizedek united them perfectly, just as Jesus did. If Melchizedek was an archetype of divine wisdom and righteousness, then Jesus represents the completion and perfection of that archetype. Melchizedek served as a glimpse of a divine priesthood, unbound by earthly institutions, while Jesus brought that priesthood into direct contact with humanity. He was not just a mediator between God and people. He was God made present, making divine grace and wisdom accessible to all. This profound connection between Melchizedek and Jesus reveals something timeless about the nature of spirituality. True priesthood is not about institutional authority or inherited tradition. It is about embodying divine justice, wisdom, and love. It is a calling that transcends history, one that continues to invite people into a deeper relationship with the sacred. Many scholars argue that Jesus was not merely an heir to the priesthood of Melchizedek, but its ultimate fulfillment, the prophetic realization and the pinnacle of this eternal spiritual lineage. Just as Melchizedek stood outside the conventional religious hierarchy of his time, Jesus also defied the established norms of the Jewish priesthood. While the temple priests strictly adhered to the rituals of the Mosaic law, Jesus demonstrated that true priesthood was not about ritualistic observance, but but about embodying justice, mercy, and absolute devotion to God's will, when he declared, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." John 14:6. He was not merely making a claim about his authority. He was affirming his role as the supreme mediator between God and humanity, bridging the divine and the earthly in a way no priest before him had done. Jesus' life perfectly embodied the archetype of the priest-king in its highest sense. Unlike earthly rulers who wore golden crowns and wielded military power, he bore a crown of thorns, signifying that his kingdom was not of this world, but of a higher, spiritual nature. While worldly kings conquered through force, Jesus reigned through humility, service, and self-sacrifice. This contrast is essential in understanding why his priesthood was not just an extension of Melchizedek's, but its purest and most complete expression. He did not merely assume a priestly role, he became the sacrifice itself. Whereas the Levitical priests offered animals as atonement for sin, Jesus offered himself as the ultimate, eternal sacrifice, the Lamb of God, whose death and resurrection opened a new path to reconciliation with God. This act not only fulfilled the ancient tradition of Melchizedek, but elevated it to its highest purpose. Furthermore, Jesus consistently challenged the rigid interpretations of the law and revealed its deeper spiritual essence. In the Sermon on the Mount, he stated, "Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them." Matthew 5:17. This fulfillment was not about maintaining the letter of the law, but unveiling its true intent: justice, love, and faithfulness. Through this, he demonstrated that his priesthood was not merely a continuation of an ancient lineage, but the full revelation of divine truth, unshackled from legalistic constraints. A compelling testament to Jesus' transcendence over Melchizedek's priesthood lies in the resurrection. While Melchizedek is described as having no recorded beginning or end, Jesus defeated death itself, proving that the true eternal priesthood cannot be bound by mortality. His resurrection was the ultimate confirmation that he lives forever, not just as a symbolic figure, but as the living high priest who intercedes for humanity at the right hand of God. Unlike any priest before him, Jesus not only ministered in life, but continues his priesthood eternally, ensuring that redemption is always accessible. Another powerful aspect of Jesus' priesthood was his radical inclusivity. Unlike the Levitical priests, who served primarily within the Jewish religious structure, and unlike Melchizedek, whose priesthood remains mysterious, Jesus actively reached out to the marginalized, sinners, the sick, and the rejected. His ministry was not limited to religious elites, but extended to all who sought truth and redemption, reinforcing the idea that God's kingdom was open to all, regardless of social or spiritual status. This universal priesthood was foreshadowed in Melchizedek, but fully realized in Jesus, who broke all barriers between the sacred and the ordinary, making divine grace accessible to everyone. A crucial moment that solidifies Jesus as the culmination of the Melchizedekian priesthood is found in his discussion with the religious leaders regarding Psalm 110. When questioned about his identity, he referenced the verse, "The Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand," Matthew 22:44, affirming his divine authority not just as a Messiah, but as the eternal priest-king foretold in prophecy. This passage, later emphasized in the book of Hebrews, confirms that Jesus was not merely an extension of Melchizedek's priesthood, he was its fulfillment. Hebrews further reinforces this by describing Jesus as the author and finisher of our faith. Hebrews 12:2, a statement that shifts the perspective from inheritance to origination and completion. Unlike a traditional heir who carries on a legacy, Jesus inaugurates and perfects the divine plan. His priesthood is not passive. It is active, transformative, and eternal. Perhaps the most profound implication of Jesus' priesthood is his invitation for all believers to participate in it. Revelation 1:6 declares that Christ has made us priests unto God, meaning that his priesthood is not an exclusive title, but a living reality extended to all who follow him. This is where the true meaning of the Melchizedekian priesthood reaches its highest significance. It is not a position to be occupied, but a mission to be lived. Thus, Jesus was not just an heir to Melchizedek's spiritual lineage. He was its full embodiment, its final revelation, and its highest realization. He demonstrated that the eternal priesthood is not about ritual or inheritance, but about self-giving love, divine justice, and a life wholly surrendered to God. In recognizing this, we move forward to explore the practical and spiritual lessons that this eternal priesthood offers us in our daily lives, understanding that we, too, are called to be bearers of divine truth, justice, and love in the world. The figures of Melchizedek and the eternal priesthood of Jesus are not merely distant theological concepts or relics of ancient history. Instead, they carry profound spiritual and practical lessons that can shape the way we live today. Understanding this sacred lineage encourages us to reflect on our personal journeys and inspires us to act with greater justice, compassion, and purpose. The legacy of this priesthood calls each of us to be agents of reconciliation, bearers of peace, and living reflections of divine love in the modern world. One of the first and most vital lessons we learn from this priesthood is the power of justice. Melchizedek is described as the King of righteousness, and Jesus echoed this principle in both his words and actions. In the Sermon on the Mount, he proclaimed, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled." Matthew 5:6. However, this justice is not merely about adhering to laws or human regulations. It is about integrity, fairness, and unwavering commitment to divine principles, even when it requires personal sacrifice. True justice, as exemplified by Christ, means standing up for the vulnerable, showing mercy, and ensuring that our actions align with God's will. Another profound lesson is the pursuit of peace. Melchizedek, as the King of Salem, which means peace, embodied harmony, while Jesus was foretold as the Prince of Peace. Yet peace in their teachings was not about the absence of struggle, but about the presence of divine trust. Jesus taught that true peace is found not in external circumstances, but in an unshakable faith in God's plan. He encouraged his followers to be peacemakers, Matthew 5:9, which means actively fostering harmony, resolving conflicts, and choosing reconciliation over revenge in our daily lives. In a world filled with division, following this path is both a challenge and a calling. Humility is another fundamental characteristic of this priestly lineage. Despite Melchizedek's high status, he did not exalt himself, but rather blessed Abraham with generosity and grace. Likewise, Jesus, though being the Son of God, humbled himself by washing his disciples' feet at the Last Supper, demonstrating that true leadership is rooted in service. This act was more than symbolic. It was a radical declaration that power is not about dominance, but about love, selflessness, and lifting others up. Through this, Jesus taught that the greatest leaders are those who serve with humility and genuine care. A key teaching from Jesus' priesthood is the idea that each of us can be an inner priest. Jesus showed that we don't need elaborate rituals or sacred temples to connect with the divine. Instead, our own hearts and lives can become vessels of God's presence. Every act of kindness, honesty, and generosity can transform the ordinary into the sacred. This means living with awareness, seeing each moment as an opportunity to reflect God's love. Whether in our families, workplaces, or communities, generosity is another central virtue of this priesthood. Just as Abraham offered tithes to Melchizedek in recognition of the sacred, we are called to live generously, not just with material possessions, but also with our time, attention, and compassion. Jesus taught, "It is more blessed to give than to receive." Acts 20:25, reminding us that true abundance is found in sharing. Generosity, whether through charity, mentorship, or simple acts of kindness, is a tangible way to mirror the divine love that Christ embodied. Unwavering faith is an essential lesson from Jesus' eternal priesthood. His life was filled with trials, betrayal, suffering, and even death on the cross. Yet he remained faithful to his mission. His example teaches us that faith is not the absence of doubts, but the choice to trust in God, even when the path ahead is unclear. We may face struggles, but like Jesus, we are called to remain steadfast, knowing that God's plan is greater than our momentary hardships. Silence and reflection also play a significant role in this spiritual lineage. Melchizedek appeared briefly in Scripture, offering a blessing without a grand speech or prolonged explanation. Sometimes, spiritual power is found not in words, but in quiet contemplation and deep listening. Jesus, too, often withdrew to solitary places to pray and renew his strength. This teaches us the importance of setting aside moments for meditation, prayer, and self-examination. In the busyness of life, taking time for spiritual reflection allows us to realign with our purpose and draw closer to God. Forgiveness is another cornerstone of this priesthood. Jesus, while suffering on the cross, declared, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." Luke 23:34. This ultimate act of forgiveness reveals that to truly embody divine love, we must let go of resentment and embrace mercy, not only for others but for ourselves. Forgiveness liberates us from bitterness and allows us to move forward with a renewed heart and spirit. Courage to live with purpose is also a defining trait of this sacred lineage. Melchizedek appeared as a figure who understood his mission to bless and be a channel of peace and righteousness. Jesus, too, lived every moment with divine certainty, never straying from his path despite opposition. Often we struggle with doubt and uncertainty about our purpose, but this priestly tradition reminds us that we each have a unique calling. By living with authenticity, faith, and dedication, we fulfill our role in God's greater plan. Finally, this eternal priesthood teaches us the importance of hope. No matter our trials, setbacks, or losses, Christ's resurrection assures us that there is always a promise of renewal and redemption. Jesus overcame death, proving that our story does not end in despair. No matter how broken we may feel, God offers us a new beginning. This message of hope is one of the greatest gifts of Christ's priesthood, inspiring us to keep moving forward with faith and confidence. These lessons from Melchizedek and Jesus invite us to transform our daily lives into a living expression of faith, love, and justice. The goal is not perfection, but continual growth and surrender to God's divine purpose. As we move forward, we delve deeper into the final mystery of Melchizedek and its spiritual implications. To this day, Melchizedek remains an enigmatic figure. Was he a historical person, a divine manifestation, or a foreshadowing of Christ himself? His lack of genealogy, the absence of details about his life's beginning or end, and his eternal priesthood make him one of the most mysterious characters in Scripture. But perhaps the true secret of Melchizedek is not in uncovering his identity, but in understanding what he symbolizes in our spiritual journey. One of the most compelling interpretations is that Melchizedek represents divine wisdom, a bridge between heaven and earth. Unlike earthly kings who rule through power and conquest, Melchizedek was a king of justice and peace, emphasizing that true authority comes not from force, but from righteousness and alignment with God's purpose. His brief yet impactful appearance in the biblical narrative serves as a timeless reminder that we are all called to seek justice, peace, and divine wisdom in our lives. Another intriguing theory regarding Melchizedek is the possibility of him being a theophany, a visible manifestation of God or Christ before his earthly incarnation. Supporters of this idea highlight striking similarities between Melchizedek and Jesus. Both hold the dual role of king and priest, both offer bread and wine, and neither belong to the traditional priestly lineage of Levi. This perspective suggests that God's presence has been actively woven into human history long before Christ's earthly ministry, subtly foreshadowing his ultimate revelation. Some interpretations, particularly in apocryphal and esoteric traditions, portray Melchizedek as a celestial being, a guardian of divine knowledge, and a spiritual mediator. These accounts describe him as an ascended master, one who has achieved a state of enlightenment and serves as an invisible guide for those seeking ultimate truth. This idea aligns with mystical traditions that propose the existence of eternal sages, working unseen to maintain spiritual harmony in the world. Whether seen as a historical figure or a divine emissary, Melchizedek remains a compelling presence in the narrative of sacred history. Beyond theories and theological interpretations, Melchizedek embodies a profound truth about the eternal nature of God's mission. His existence reminds us that certain aspects of divine purpose transcend human understanding, defying purely historical or literal explanations. His mysterious character challenges us to embrace the spiritual journey with humility, accepting that some truths are meant to be experienced rather than fully understood. One of the most fascinating aspects of Melchizedek is his absence from biblical genealogies. In Jewish tradition, lineage was crucial in determining one's identity and legitimacy, especially in religious roles. Yet, Melchizedek appears without recorded ancestry, emphasizing a priesthood not based on human descent, but on divine appointment. This directly parallels Christ, whose priesthood did not rely on Levitical heritage, but on his eternal nature and divine mission. This challenges the traditional notion that spiritual authority must be inherited, instead reinforcing the idea that it is granted by God himself. Moreover, Melchizedek's sudden and unexpected appearance in Abraham's life serves as a powerful lesson. Abraham did not seek out this mysterious priest-king. Rather, he encountered him at a crucial moment and received a transformative blessing. This reminds us that divine encounters often come when we least expect them, offering guidance, peace, and confirmation of God's presence in our lives. It is a call to remain open and receptive to unexpected moments of spiritual awakening. Another remarkable element of Melchizedek's story is its continuity throughout biblical history. Though he appears briefly in Genesis, his significance resurfaces centuries later in Psalm 110, and again in the New Testament's letter to the Hebrews. This illustrates the timeless nature of God's plan, seamlessly linking past, present, and future into a divine narrative of redemption. Even when we fail to comprehend the full scope of God's work, we can trust that He is orchestrating His purpose across generations. The power of silence surrounding Melchizedek is also worth noting. Unlike many biblical figures whose lives and speeches are extensively recorded, Melchizedek remains largely unspoken, yet profoundly impactful. This suggests that spiritual depth is not measured by outward displays, but by an interconnection with the divine. His presence in the biblical narrative is brief, yet his influence endures, emphasizing that true significance often lies not in grandeur, but in quiet strength and wisdom. Reflecting on Melchizedek's mystery encourages us to rethink our understanding of time and eternity. His priesthood, described as having neither beginning nor end, symbolizes an eternal truth. God's love and purpose transcend human limitations. Just as Melchizedek's priesthood existed beyond the confines of earthly lineage, Christ's role as the ultimate high priest assures us of an unchanging divine covenant. This realization provides comfort in times of uncertainty, reminding us that we are part of a grand, unfolding story of redemption. Ultimately, Melchizedek presents a universal truth. Spiritual lineage is not determined by human institutions, but by a heartfelt response to God's call. To walk in this lineage means embracing justice, faith, and compassion, not out of obligation, but from a deep understanding of divine love. Jesus exemplified this reality, inviting us to follow His path. The eternal priesthood is not merely a title. It is a calling, an opportunity to live in communion with God and reflect His light in the world. As we conclude this exploration of Melchizedek's mystery, we are invited to reflect on how these profound truths can shape our lives today. More than a historical figure or theological concept, Melchizedek challenges us to live with greater awareness, faith, and purpose. His story compels us to seek divine wisdom, embrace the unknown with trust, and actively participate in God's unfolding plan. In doing so, we step into our own role within this eternal priesthood, carrying forward the mission of justice, peace, and divine love. Another intriguing theory regarding Melchizedek is the possibility of him being a theophany, a visible manifestation of God or Christ before his earthly incarnation. Supporters of this idea highlight striking similarities between Melchizedek and Jesus. Both hold the dual role of king and priest, both offer bread and wine, and neither belong to the traditional priestly lineage of Levi. This perspective suggests that God's presence has been actively woven into human history long before Christ's earthly ministry, subtly foreshadowing his ultimate revelation. Some interpretations, particularly in apocryphal and esoteric traditions, portray Melchizedek as a celestial being, a guardian of divine knowledge, and a spiritual mediator. These accounts describe him as an ascended master, one who has achieved a state of enlightenment and serves as an invisible guide for those seeking ultimate truth. This idea aligns with mystical traditions that propose the existence of eternal sages, working unseen to maintain spiritual harmony in the world. Whether seen as a historical figure or a divine emissary, Melchizedek remains a compelling presence in the narrative of sacred history. Beyond theories and theological interpretations, Melchizedek embodies a profound truth about the eternal nature of God's mission. His existence reminds us that certain aspects of divine purpose transcend human understanding, defying purely historical or literal explanations. His mysterious character challenges us to embrace the spiritual journey with humility, accepting that some truths are meant to be experienced rather than fully understood. One of the most fascinating aspects of Melchizedek is his absence from biblical genealogies. In Jewish tradition, lineage was crucial in determining one's identity and legitimacy, especially in religious roles. Yet, Melchizedek appears without recorded ancestry, emphasizing a priesthood not based on human descent, but on divine appointment. This directly parallels Christ, whose priesthood did not rely on Levitical heritage, but on his eternal nature and divine mission. This challenges the traditional notion that spiritual authority must be inherited, instead reinforcing the idea that it is granted by God himself. Moreover, Melchizedek's sudden and unexpected appearance in Abraham's life serves as a powerful lesson. Abraham did not seek out this mysterious priest-king, or rather he encountered him at a crucial moment and received a transformative blessing. This reminds us that divine encounters often come when we least expect them, offering guidance, peace, and confirmation of God's presence in our lives. It is a call to remain open and receptive to unexpected moments of spiritual awakening. Another remarkable element of Melchizedek's story is its continuity throughout biblical history. Though he appears briefly in Genesis, his significance resurfaces centuries later in Psalm 110 and again in the New Testament's letter to the Hebrews. This illustrates the timeless nature of God's plan, seamlessly linking past, present, and future into a divine narrative of redemption. Even when we fail to comprehend the full scope of God's work, we can trust that He is orchestrating His purpose across generations. The power of silence surrounding Melchizedek is also worth noting. Unlike many biblical figures whose lives and speeches are extensively recorded, Melchizedek remains largely unspoken, yet profoundly impactful. This suggests that spiritual depth is not measured by outward displays, but by an inner connection with the divine. His presence in the biblical narrative is brief, yet his influence endures, emphasizing that true significance often lies not in grandeur, but in quiet strength and wisdom. Reflecting on Melchizedek's mystery encourages us to rethink our understanding of time and eternity. His priesthood, described as having neither beginning nor end, symbolizes an eternal truth. God's love and purpose transcend human limitations. Just as Melchizedek's priesthood existed beyond the confines of earthly lineage, Christ's role as the ultimate high priest assures us of an unchanging divine covenant. This realization provides comfort in times of uncertainty, reminding us that we are part of a grand, unfolding story of redemption. Ultimately, Melchizedek presents a universal truth. Spiritual lineage is not determined by human institutions, but by a heartfelt response to God's call. To walk in this lineage means embracing justice, faith, and compassion, not out of obligation, but from a deep understanding of divine love. Jesus exemplified this reality, inviting us to follow his path. The eternal priesthood is not merely a title, it is a calling, an opportunity to live in communion with God and reflect his light in the world. As we conclude this exploration of Melchizedek's mystery, we are invited to reflect on how these profound truths can shape our lives today. More than a historical figure or theological concept, Melchizedek challenges us to live with greater awareness, faith, and purpose. His story compels us to seek divine wisdom, embrace the unknown with trust, and actively participate in God's unfolding plan. In doing so, we step into our own role within this eternal priesthood, carrying forward the mission of justice, peace, and divine love.